There comes a point in stories like this where the focus shifts from the place to the people within it. Because places don't act on their own. They are shaped by the people who live inside them. And to understand what happened at number 25 Cromwell Street, we have to understand Fred and Rose West. This is Hidden Chronicles. I am Jenny. I love history and I am fascinated by the moment where human psychology collides with it in the worst possible ways. In this series, I explore crime through context rather than spectacle. I ask not just what happened, but what kind of world made it possible. In the last episode, we began with a place, an ordinary street, an ordinary house, a setting that from the outside did not raise questions. But inside that house was a relationship, and that relationship matters because it shaped everything that followed. Fred West was born in 1941 in Gloucestershire. He grew up in a rural environment within a family structure that has since been described as deeply complex, and in some respects, deeply troubling. There are accounts of blurred boundaries within the home, of behaviour that, when viewed later, suggested something was not quite right, even in those early years. But at the time, much of this was not recognised in the way it might be today. It was not clearly understood, and that mattered. Because when behaviour is not recognised, it is not challenged. And when it is not challenged, it does not stop. As Fred grew older, those patterns did not disappear. They developed. They became part of how he interacted with the world, part of how he understood relationships, and part of how he exercised his control. Rosemary Letts was born in 1953. Her early life was unstable, marked by vulnerability, by disruption, by a lack of consistent care and protection. And those early experiences shape something fundamental. They shape how somebody understands safety, how they understand trust, how they understand what is acceptable within a relationship. If a child grows up without clear, safe boundaries, they do not automatically recognise those boundaries later on in life. When Fred and Rose met, she was still very young, and the difference between them was not just age. It was experience, power, understanding. Fred had already lived through more of life, whilst Rose was still forming her identity, still learning what relationships looked like, and still learning what felt normal. And in that space, influence matters. Because when one person holds more experience, more confidence, more control, they shape the direction of the relationship. From the outside, it might have looked like a couple forming, a relationship developing, two people building a life together. But relationships are not defined by appearances. They are defined by dynamics. Over time, Fred and Rose became a couple. They built a life together. They got married. They had children. And they settled into number 25 Cromwell Street. From the outside, this looked like progression. A relationship becoming a family. A home being established. A life being built. And that is important, because from the outside it reinforced the idea that everything was normal. They were not hidden. They were not isolated from the world. They were a part of it. They were seen on the street. They would have been recognised by neighbours. They were known in the way people are known in everyday life. Not in detail, but in passing. And like everything else around them, they appeared ordinary. But what matters here is not how things looked. It is how they functioned. Within the home, the dynamic between Fred and Rose was not equal. Accounts that would later emerge suggest that Fred held a significant level of control. Control over the environment. Control over decisions. Control over the structure of the household. And control does not always look dramatic. It does not always appear as something obvious. It can, and often does, begin quietly. Through influence. Through expectation. Through the gradual shaping of what is considered normal. Over time, that kind of control becomes embedded. It becomes part of the relationship itself, so that it is no longer questioned, it is simply how things are. And when that happens, it becomes very difficult to challenge. Rose existed within that environment, and that matters. Because environments shape behaviour. They shape choices. They shape what feels possible and what feels impossible. And this is where the story becomes more complex. Because understanding this dynamic is not about removing responsibility for one person or for both. It is not about excusing what happened. It is about recognizing how relationships can develop in ways that are not immediately visible from the outside. Within number 25, this relationship shaped everything. It shaped the atmosphere of the home. It shaped how the household functioned. It shaped what was seen and what remained hidden. And from the outside, none of this was fully visible. There were no clear labels, no obvious explanations. There was just a family, living within a house on an ordinary street. But over time, there were moments, things that did not quite sit right. There are various accounts that describe tension, control, a sense that something within the household was not entirely as it should be. But again, these were fragments, not a full picture. And that matters, because fragments are difficult to act on. They are difficult to interpret, and they are difficult to fully understand. And in environments where everything else appears normal, those fragments don't immediately become something larger. They remain separate, unclear, easy to question, easy to dismiss. And that creates a space. Space for patterns to continue. Space for behaviour to develop. Space for something serious to exist, without being fully recognised for what it is. This is how situations like this evolve. Not suddenly. Not in a way that is immediately obvious, but gradually, over time, within relationships, within environments that do not appear unusual from the outside. And that is what makes this part of the story so important. Because before anything is discovered, before anything is understood, there is always a period when everything exists beneath the surface. A relationship, a household, a pattern of behaviour that is not yet fully visible. And that is where we are now. Next time we move inside number 25. To understand what that environment looked like from within, how it functioned, and how patterns that began quietly become something more established over time. Thank you for listening. Until next time, take care and be gentle with what history leaves behind.